Let's go back to that anti-weaponization fund. Earlier, I spoke to Maryland Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin about that and related issues. Please listen. Congressman, on the so-called anti-weaponization fund, the acting attorney general said this week to Congress it will not go forward. However, do you believe Congress must do something legislatively to stop it? And do you believe it has a mind to do so?
Yes, we need to stop it because the president obviously changes his mind from day to day, if not hour to hour. And we need to make it very clear that the institution that's got the power of the purse, which is the Congress, forbids any use of money for these purposes. So we got to shut down that fund, and then we have to shut down the flow of money to through the judgment fund for any of these purposes, to give to January 6 rioters and insurrectionists, to give to the president or his family, or to use for any of these purposes outside of the law. So that's the very beginning of what we need to do.
In the conversations on the House floor, do you believe Republicans are inclined to join that effort?
Well, certainly a number of senators on the Republican side have spoken out against it. We know there are several Republican members on the House side who are very troubled by it, including Thomas Massie, who might feel liberated to be even more articulate in defense of the Constitution against the president these days after his election. And we know that there are several others out there. So we think that if we have any fair opportunity to vote on it, there will be a strong bipartisan majority rejecting this political slush fund, which violates about a half a dozen different provisions in the Constitution, right? It gives money to the president when he's not allowed to accept any money beyond his official salary. It usurps the lawmaking power and the appropriations power of the Congress. It turns the executive branch in the Department of Justice into something like a court deciding specific cases and controversies. The language is totally vague and so on. So there's really nothing lawful about it, and Congress does need to act.
Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, has proposed an alternative, and I'll read it to you. We create a weaponization fund that will be available to those who can prove their claim against the federal government through the Federal Tort Claims Act, 1946 legislation. Do you believe that is in any way valid?
Well, I've got a similar proposal, but it actually is based on the law. And our proposal is that if the government of the United States violates anybody's constitutional rights, then anybody can go to court and prove that. Weaponization, they have never defined and is not a federal or a state crime. Lawfare, again, is not defined anywhere and is not a federal or state crime. So that's just meaningless. They're saying they want a slush fund to give to the people that they think the government has been weaponized against. Obviously, somebody like James Comey or Letitia James or the families of Renee Good and Alex Preddy feel like the U.S. government was weaponized against them. But that's just rhetorical. We're talking about real crimes. Now, murder is a crime. If the government kills you and deprives you of your right to life, that is a deprivation of due process. And so the families of Alex Preddy and Renee Good should be able to go to court and prove that their constitutional rights have been violated, as should any American. But we don't need a special fund run out of the White House or the Department of Justice. We just need the rule of law. And so it's amazing to me the way that they confound people with their different rhetorical devices.
Let's go to the underlying settlement that set this so-called anti-weaponization fund in motion, the settlement with the IRS. Do you believe that is legally defensible? Do you believe courts will accept it? You've called it a super pardon for the president, his businesses, and his family. Or can and will Congress step in to eradicate or limit that?
We have legislation to stop that, too. And no, it's not remotely lawful because the settlement was collusive. There obviously was no...
What do you mean by that? When you say collusive, what do you mean?
It means there was no adversary posture between Donald Trump, the plaintiff, claiming that his rights were violated, and Donald Trump, the president of the United States, who he's suing. It's basically Trump versus Trump. But Trump is going up against his handpicked attorney general, who used to be his private criminal defense lawyer. It's hard to imagine a situation of less adversary, less oppositional the frame going into litigation like that. And that's why the judge in Florida took the case back and said, I want oral argument and briefing about whether or not this was a fraud on the court and therefore a fraud on the country. And just like the litigation was a fraud, the settlement was a fraud. There was nothing to Donald Trump's lawsuit against the IRS. In fact, the IRS lawyers themselves said this came several months too late. It's totally outside the statute of limitations. And when you get to the merits of it, the substance, the IRS had already taken the position in other cases on the exact same issue that the US government is not liable to pay for the actions of third-party government contractors that the government's not aware of. So they'd already taken a position differently, but then suddenly they want to settle for $1.776 billion. And then what you reference, Major, which is this get-out-of-jail-free card for Donald Trump, his family, and all of their businesses for all time related to any crimes or any other civil transgressions they may have committed up until now.
You mentioned the word lawfare. That's also a website in which a lot of research about legal matters in this country occurs. And I came across something that said this, and I want to read it to you. At least 97 of the more than 1,500 individuals granted clemency by President Trump for their roles in the January 6th Capitol riot have been arrested for, charged with, or convicted of crimes separate from January 6th since their participation in the January 6th riot. 5 recipients of presidential clemency were arrested in connection with conduct that occurred, at least in part, subsequent to Trump's freeing them from prison. How do you react to these numbers?
Well, it's outrageous and it's entirely predictable because he pardoned en masse, more than 1,500 people without looking at whether they'd shown any rehabilitation, any contrition, whether they were ready to go back to society, including, people who engaged in violence against our police officers, who injured, wounded, hospitalized, and in some cases permanently disabled our police officers. And he just said, everybody goes free. Well, in that midst, we could go one by one, but take one guy, Andrew Paul Johnson, who was literally let out of jail by Donald Trump. He gets out and then he goes and within a matter of weeks sexually assaults and abuses a 12-year-old boy and a 12-year-old girl. And then when they were obviously screaming and hysterical and they were, going to go and tell their families and call the police, he said, no, you can't tell anybody. I'm going to get $1 million from the president or more, and I'll be able to share the money with you and your families if you don't turn me in, which of course they ignored. And they went, and that guy is now back in jail for life. But meantime, these kids' lives have been irreversibly affected because of this mass pardon. Before Trump came along, every other president had followed the recommendations of the pardon attorney, who would look specifically at the applications and see whether the person had made progress in jail, whether they had paid their fines, whether they had, paid restitution, whether they had shown contrition. But he just let everybody go. And he's been doing that with these pardons, and he's pardoned people who owe more than $1.5 billion. A lot of white-collar criminals and fraudsters he's let free too. Again, this is unique among the presidents. Every other president had said, I want to see that you pay your fines back. You've paid your debt to society, but not Donald Trump. It's enough that they demonstrated loyalty to him.
Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Major. Great to be with you.